They serve this country with honor and decency and respect. Do not diminish their work simply because you tried to make a cheap point that you could tweet. I yield back.
Yeah!
But if you're coming to our state illegally, you're not only welcome with open arms, you're entitled to free stuff on the taxpayer's dime. This is absolutely disgraceful.
To the President of the United States to rescind millions of dollars in funding that we know are going to the No Kings protests that were authorized and basically given under the last administration.
Wild.
That is what Congress is supposed to do, not point fingers, not blame people, but actually ensure that the American people are protected and not fighting for foreign interests, foreign governments, and also the communist stream.
Well, Pam Bondi continues to unload on the sanctuary cities. She posted this explaining a new lawsuit now being filed against New York for undermining immigration enforcement, saying lawless sanctuary policies are driving the chaos we're seeing in California and elsewhere. We refuse to accept this blatant disregard for law and order anywhere in America. And a bunch of sanctuary governors were hauled into Congress today. Byron Donalds was lacing into this dude, Tim Walz, about his calling ICE agents Gestapo, which we'll get into. And PB&J Pritzker got also asked about going into the women's bathroom, and he got a little awkward there. Why'd you post that you think people should go into the women's restrooms? Did you go into the women's restrooms? But Pam Bondi gave us the full press briefing, saying New York Tishville is getting sued. Their policies are blocking immigration officials from arresting individuals at or near New York courthouses. And if they would just, when an illegal comes in and gets charged with a crime, if they would just hold them and hand them off to ICE, then they wouldn't have to come in and raid them. Understand? They don't want to do that. By being non-cooperative, they're exacerbating the problem. Specifically, lawsuit says there's a law called Protect Our Courts Act that shields dangerous aliens from being lawfully detained at a courthouse. Lawless sanctuary cities are the root cause of violence. New York's law comes after Trump issued his national emergency order, and they are now getting sued. So the full complaint is here. Let's see who it's addressed to. Hochul and Tishy Latish, all being sued by Pam Bondi, which is just perfect. She says, we can conduct an arrest near or at the courthouses, and the reason we want to do that is because it reduces the risk of flight, and these people are also usually screened for weapons before they come into the courthouse. We also have criminal warrants and immigration warrants as well. Now, contrary to this common sense approach, they'd rather have them protected, so we have to come and find them. There's a Protect Our Courts Act, which says you can't do this. Through a separate executive order that singles out the feds, New York has forbidden its employees from sharing any critical information to the feds. These laws are intolerable obstacles to the federal law enforcement. This prevents federal agents from conducting these arrests anywhere near a courthouse. Now, through these enactments, they are obstructing federal law enforcement, and they are facilitating the evasion of dangerous criminals from being apprehended by federal agents. That's wild. New York enactments also regulate federal officials by requiring them to get criminal arrest warrants before taking custody. Further, New York is intentionally obstructing the sharing of information, and so accordingly, this is all invalid. We have the Supremacy Clause, and our laws reign supreme. And so we're suing Tishy, Hochul, and New York because the Constitution vests the power to the president, and under the Supremacy Clause, a state law is preempted if it stands as an obstacle to the objectives of Congress. A state law is also invalid if it discriminates against the United States, and that's exactly what's happening here. Accordingly, Congress has the right to expel aliens, and we're doing that right now. Now, New York said, actually, we're going to overrule you, and we're not going to cooperate with your laws, and that's a problem. The POCA Act was passed in New York. It says any family or household member includes a bunch of people, and if you have an intimate relationship with them, they're all protected. Now, there were other executive orders from Cuomo saying don't cooperate with the feds about any of this stuff, and this amounts to obstruction. Information sharing provisions hinder ICE, and now we're suing. You violated the Supremacy Clause. You also are unlawfully regulating the federal government. You can't impose new requirements on our ICE agents, and you're discriminating against us too. And so Pam Bondi says, we want this court to enter a judgment declaring New York's law and executive orders illegal, violating the Supremacy Clause, meaning they are unlawful and unenforceable, saying this court should also enter an injunction stopping New York, as well as anybody else in New York, from complying with those laws, start cooperating with us, and give us attorney's fees. Good to see this going on offense a bit. Sue them, make them defend their bad laws in their states in these courts. And of course, this is being filed in federal court, the Northern District of New York. So we'll see where this gets assigned, but Pam Bondi comes out swinging, and more sanctuary state governors were also in Congress today. Byron Donalds obliterating blaming Tim Walz over his Gestapo comments.
You said earlier that the ICE agents under the orders of President Trump are a modern-day Gestapo. Do you realize how disgusting a phrase that is, considering the history of Nazi Germany? Would you like to recant that statement?
Would you, Tim?
What I said, Congressman, and I have a long history of supporting law enforcement, I said President Trump was using them as his modern-day Gestapo, not identifying who you are, coming up in unmarked vans, taking people away and giving...
Is it the responsibility of ICE to actually deport illegal aliens in the United States who are here? Isn't that their responsibility?
Yes, it is, Congressman, except that the Constitution is not an inconvenience. It's not an either-or.
Nobody
You
said
can
an
do your
inconvenience.
job and
He have a
practice the
responsibility to deport illegal aliens, and the
Through due
president is
process.
going through that process right now.
We are
And
not
let's be very clear, the previous administration, they abused every process there is under border laws to allow more than 10 million people into the country illegally. And this is a burden on all Americans. And so the president is doing his job. So it is sick to refer to Americans who are ICE agents as Gestapo. Governor, you're wrong. You need to apologize to these agents. They're doing their jobs. They are Americans. They serve this country with honor and decency and respect. Do not diminish their work simply because you tried to make a cheap point that you could tweet. I yield back.
Yeah! Byron Donalds laying the ruckus down on Tim Walz, who is besmirching the good names of our ICE agents who are enforcing federal law against illegal invaders who have come into our country and should be deported immediately. Now, another sanctuary city governor called J.B Pritzker, who is over in Illinois, was also there, and he said, you know, in response to all these ICE raids, that people should protest. And he said one of those protests should be people who are men going into women's bathrooms, which is a weird thing to like jump to. It's like, okay, boycott Trump hotels or something. But for Pritzker to be like, I know, go into women's restrooms. What? Why? He got called out about that today.
Mr. Governor, do you think that biological men should be able to use women's restrooms?
I'm not sure how this has to do with immigration.
It's just a yes or no question.
Why are you
It's very easy to
politicizing
answer.
this?
Do you
I
think
thought
that
we were
men
here
should be using
doing
women's
fact
restrooms?
finding. I'm sorry?
Do you think men should be allowed in women's restrooms?
I'm not sure why this has come to this issue.
You
It has
tweeted
nothing
that
to do
as
with
a
immigration.
protest against President Trump, everyone should use the other gender's bathroom today. Have you ever used the women's restroom?
Not that I can recall ever, sir. No.
You wanted everybody else to do it, but you didn't?
Sir, I'm not sure why we're on a topic that has
I'm
nothing to
asking
do
you,
with
you're
today's hearing.
advocating for men to use women's restrooms, but you didn't do it?
I do not advocate that, no.
Well, actually, you did. You said everyone should use the other gender's bathroom today.
I can tell you that you are
Do you regret
politicizing
saying
this
this?
in a way that what we ought to be focusing on is
Do you
the
regret
failure of the federal
encouraging men to
government
use women's restrooms?
and the Congress to deal with immigration reform.
Do you regret encouraging men to use women's restrooms?
Again, you're taking us on topics that have
Did you ever
nothing to
consider
do
that
with
women don't
the
want you in
subject
their,
that you
in their
invited us here
bathrooms?
for?
He did. He definitely was using the women's bathrooms. You saw that very uncomfortable pause right there. We knew it. He got busted by Congress sitting down to pee. Pritzker from Illinois busted in Congress. Now, we also saw Tim Walz just got reamed by Tom Emmer, and Dustin Grage is great over on X. He says this beating lasted for 5 straight minutes, but we'll listen to a little bit of it and see how Tim Walz does here. Here's where it starts.
That keep law enforcement from enforcing federal laws, close quote. On May 17th, just this spring at the University of Minnesota Law School's commencement ceremony, you said, quote, Donald Trump's modern day Gestapo is scooping folks up off the streets. When you said the words modern day Gestapo, you were referring to ICE agents. Gestapo, by the way, sir, was the official secret police of Hitler's Nazi Germany. So you're calling ICE agents modern day Nazis. Given the attacks on ICE agents that took place in Los Angeles over the weekend, don't you regard your dangerous inflammatory rhetoric as a problem?
The questions do you want me to answer first?
So, sir, it saddens me that you refuse to express regret from comparing ICE to Nazis. ICE agents are brave Americans who get up every morning, leave their families, and put the ICE agent who is risking their life to protect our communities. Minnesota is all too familiar, by the way, with the chaos that ensues when you refuse to work with law enforcement to enforce the law. In May 2020, looting, acts of violence, and arson occurred on your watch in Minneapolis after you refused to bring in the National Guard. Governor, your agenda is clear. Free health care, free college and driver's licenses for illegals while handcuffing law enforcement when they're trying to protect our citizens and their communities. If you think that's not a sanctuary state, you shouldn't be governor. By turning Minnesota into a magnet for illegals, you have opened up our communities to dangerous criminals, including known terrorists, gang members, murderers, and child predators. You have sent a resounding message that if you're a hardworking, law-abiding citizen of Minnesota, your safety and well-being are not the priorities of Tim Walz and his administration. But if you're coming to our state illegally, you're not only welcome with open arms, you're entitled to free stuff on the taxpayer's dime. crime. This is absolutely disgraceful. Governor Walz,
Get
your
reamed.
sanctuary state agenda has been defined by your utter failure. You have failed to enforce the rule of law. You have failed to uphold our national sovereignty. And most importantly, you have failed the people of Minnesota. The time for radical sanctuary state policy, sir, is over. The voters made that clear last November when they elected President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. You remember him, don't you? Governor, the time for real leadership is now. With that, sir, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record the governor's tweet that I referenced from May 23rd, 2018, which makes it clear his hatred for federal law enforcement.
All right, so one more from Luna, who was lacing into him for being invested with the Chinese. So Tim Walz just got reamed all day long.
That you're tracking actually had an internal memo that was released that stated that the government of China considered you a prime target for influence operations. I'm letting you know that now because I do
Yeah, and remember Tim Walz spent a lot of time over there with all those young boys teaching them things there.
believe that you should be made aware, if you are not already, that you are working with and going to be speaking at an organization and rally that not is just funded by Christy Walton, the heiress of Walmart, but also has ties to the Chinese Progressive Association, largely funding it, that actually brags on their website that they are pro-Maoist. Also, too, funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. I know there's a lot of people on this committee that don't like billionaires interfering in politics, but say nothing when George Soros gets over $260 million from USAID through the last administration
Bill
that's been
Gates,
funneled into
or
some of these
Zuckerberg,
nonprofits and
or any of
organizations.
them.
So
Reid
I guess my
Hoffman,
question for
hundreds
you
of
guys
millions.
is, now that I've made you aware that these riots are not about illegals and they're not about immigrants, if they did, they would have been protesting under Barack Obama, who's also dubbed the deporter-in-chief. And frankly, I think many of you would say that Barack Obama was a good president. Are you going to say that Barack Obama wasn't a good president? Yes or no, Governor Walz? Do you think he was a good president?
Do I think Barack Obama was a good
Correct.
president? I think he did a good job.
Okay, how about you, Governor Pritzker?
I think he did a good job.
Copy and paste.
Hochul, and yes, he did do a good job.
Okay, next.
Copy and
Perryman?
paste.
I think President Obama did a good job.
So then
Copy
you'd
and
understand
paste.
that Barack Obama had the very same policies for the most part on immigration that Republicans are parroting today, and yet you guys are sitting here saying that we're Gestapo. And what I would tell you is that what happens with open borders is that the real people that are coming here, the ones that are exploited, actually it hurts people on both sides, not just Americans, but the illegals. Some of you had said here to the actual committee that you are doing what you can to assist these people. But what I would say is that your policies aren't actually done from a place of understanding and sympathy. I would say that it's actually doing the exact opposite. And when you use brown people, just like they use black people with BLM and Marxists during
True.
BLM
100%.
to usher that in, when you use brown people and you put Mexican flags with them saying that you stand up for illegal immigrants, but you follow the money and it's going back to the Communist Party, what you're essentially doing is using your platform as elected officials, the trust the American people have put in you, essentially to usher in communism. You're not actually fighting for American values. Don't roll your eyes because it's a serious topic and that's where the money's coming from. So now I'm informing you, so now you guys can make your decisions, but please be informed, sir, Mr. Walz, that if you truly do uphold the American ideologies and perspectives on
He
the
doesn't.
Constitution, you should not be speaking at that rally. I've given you the correct information, and as of right now, I've authorized a letter to be sent to my office to the President of the United States to rescind millions of dollars in funding that we know are going to the No Kings protests that were authorized and basically given under the last administration.
Wild.
That is what Congress is supposed to do, not point fingers, not blame people, but actually ensure that the American people are protected and not fighting for foreign interests, foreign governments, and also the communist
Will the gentlelady yield for
Nice! From Representative Luna in the House explaining to those people how they're pawns of much bigger forces. They're just useful idiots who just go out there and recite Democrat talking points. I couldn't have scripted it better myself. They're all just copy and pasting. I think you did a good job. Way to go, Tim Walz. Way to set tone for the rest of your NPC governors. So we'll, of course, keep our eye on this. Thank you for joining and subscribing as we do.